Welcome back, Scotland fans, and in staying with this part of our series looking at the best historic sites around Scotland, we're staying with the West Coast, we're staying in the Highlands, and we're going to one of the best and most beautiful castles that we've got. It's Castle Tioram.
Absolutely. Now, the first note is probably on pronunciation.
Yes, good point.
Yeah, we are in the Gaeltacht, the Gaelic-speaking part of Scotland, and so it's a phonetic language, but just under completely different terms from what we're used to in English. So it's spelled Tioram, but Tioram is basically the way to pronounce it. And what a spectacular part of the country it's in. I mean, I've cycled to Castle Tioram from the nearest train station, which I think is about 18 odd miles away up near Glenfinnan. But I mean, you've been that way a couple times, so I mean, what's it like to go down that road? You know,
I mean, this is the remoteness and the wilderness side of the West Highlands that folk love. It's got that kind of Neudart feel. It feels like you're on an island. You're not, so you're still very much part of mainland Scotland, but it's so remote. And you've got the road to the Isles, so heading west from the main hub of Fort William. The road to the Isles is a spectacular drive, but it's extremely popular, mainly because of the Harry Potter or Glenfinnan Jacobite connection that goes on there. But if you take a left after you've passed Glenfinnan, keep going down the coast towards the very remote Ardnamurchan Peninsula, that's when you start to get into the proper wilderness. And Tioram is one of the places that you have to see down there. But very few folk actually make that journey.
Yeah, it's almost a lunar landscape, isn't it? I mean, you feel like NASA could do some experimental
spaceport there,
easily. And of course, there's the lighthouse at Ardnamurchan Point. So it's just an absolutely brilliant but relatively quiet still part of the country, which is nice. There's a couple of great castles around there, actually. And you've got Mingury Castle on the south end of the Ardnamurchan Peninsula, a few other small ruins, but I think Castle Tioram is definitely the most impressive, evocative, dramatic, romantic. You could put all these adjectives on it. It still doesn't quite do it justice, I think.
And I don't know about you. I know we're not supposed to have favourites. It's like sacrilege. But top 5, Tioram is in mine.
Yeah, what really does it for you?
It is the remoteness to an extent. It's the fact that you can have it to yourself. I've been twice and no one else has been there, which is nice. As I say, it's got that kind of slightly beached islandy feel because of the tidal. It's a tidal island and it's on.
So do make sure if you visit it, check the tides, because it is not accessible during high tide. And you want to make sure you don't get stuck on the little island either when the tides come in, which can happen.
It would make a wonderful story. If you had to stay overnight at Castle Tioram or something.
Probably not the most pleasant experience in the moment, but retroactively it would make for a great story, you know. But please do try to refrain from doing that.
Please do. But it's utterly spectacular. It was one of the best drone flights I've ever had, and the footage will be available. But it was just, it's the scale of it. It feels tiny, surrounded by the vastness of the Highlands, but the coastal Highlands as well. So put all that together with an interesting character, and we'll get to her in a minute. Behind the story. That just completes it for me. Yeah,
and it is very much linked into the seaways as well. You know, as with Duart Castle as well, which I talked about in another episode, it is fundamentally what we call, a galley castle. I know there's a lot of academic debate around that exact term, but basically it's a castle which controls the seaways, and where galleys would be able to go right up to it in sort of a sheltered harbour. And through this network of galleys, which in the Highlands were called burlins, sort of an adaptation of a Norse-style war galley, and these castles, that allowed the Lords of the Isles and these Highland chieftains to completely dominate the area. And if they wanted to sail over to the north of Ireland, no problem, go for it. Day sail away at most. You want to sail out to the Outer Hebrides, fire away, just a couple hours away. So, we think of this area as being very remote, but if you told someone in the 14th century that Castle Tioram was remote, they'd say, what are you talking about? I'm at the centre of the world here,
Everything goes past it.
Exactly. It shows you how things shift.
But it is very exposed though, isn't it? I mean, it's got the full force of the Atlantic weather coming in there.
Absolutely.
So it's quite remarkable that it is still standing without much care and attention, which we'll come back to that. But talk about the structure of it perhaps a little bit.
Yeah, so Tioram is what we broadly classify not just as a galley castle, but sort of a castle with enclosure. Basically, the principle is very, very simple. It's a big sawed-off wall. Make it very thick, especially usually towards the landward side. It's thicker because you don't have to worry about an assault from the seaward side because your galleys are there covering that side of it. So very stout walls, basically like a shell, just like so. And this castle comes to us from round about the mid-1200s, which was when a lot of these stone castles were being built throughout the Highlands and Isles. In fact, if you want to find a lot of the earliest stone castles in Scotland, don't look at places like, Stirling and the mainland of the Kingdom of Scots. It's in the Isles. It's even in places like Orkney in the Outer Hebrides that we get them, which is remarkable. It's a very sort of stout turtle-like structure. And then usually what happens with these sorts of castles is they add a tower to it and more domestic features in sort of the 14th, 15th, 16th centuries. And that's exactly how it evolved. But given Castle Tioram's location and the way that it's preserved still, which is a bit precarious, the people who built it in the mid-1200s, if they were to sail into that bay, they would recognize it. They would go, "Oh, what's that funny thing sticking out above the walls?" The tower. But fundamentally, they would recognize it as their home, which, given that that's nearly 800 years ago, just gives me the chills, honestly, just thinking about it.
We have so much to learn from their approach to architecture and design.
Absolutely. Now, we've also got a few heroes and villains, safe to say, stalking the walls of Castle Tioram. Have you heard about Bruce's potential involvement?
Yes, I knew that there's been much speculation when Robert the Bruce was on the run, as he was at several points in his career. This was one of the places where he maybe took shelter, and there was a certain feminine influence that maybe took him in and maybe had a slightly romantic
we do see this in Outlaw King, and they make it pretty explicit what the nature of the relationship between Robert Bruce and Christina McCreary was. And the castle was a stronghold of the McCrearys, and Christina was the head of that family. So here we have this quintessential Highland stronghold. It's a badass woman running the show, and several actually throughout Tioram's history. But it was in sort of Bruce's deepest, darkest hour when he had been defeated at the Battle of Dalry by the MacDougals, at the Battle of Methven previously by Aymer de Valence, and he had fled out to the west coast and was seeking shelter wherever he could. And I mean, as you know, there's caves, I think there's probably hundreds of caves throughout Scotland which call themselves Bruce's Cave or King's Cave. But one strong theory is that Robert the Bruce found shelter with Christina McCreary at Castle Tioram, and that is very feasible. The castle was there at the time. Christina McCreary was amicable towards Bruce's cause. Whether there was a romantic relationship, there's some
let's go with it. Let's go with it.
I
have to say that she's kind of like Lagertha from Vikings. In my mind, that's all I can see now.
Apparently she was quite beautiful as well.
Perfect. I'm in love with
it. It just goes to show you, I mean, the same thing with Bonnie Prince Charlie, going over the sea to Skye, being aided by Flora MacDonald. Behind pretty much every great man in Scottish history is at least one great woman who, without them, they never would have accomplished much of what they did or lived to tell the tale. So we
were incredibly brave, incredibly loyal.
Absolutely.
These pivotal characters in Scottish history, they're the most treacherous time in life, really. When it really is. They've run out of friends, they've run out of places to run and hide. Someone needs to take them in, someone needs to hide them, someone needs to shelter them from the law, who are fast on their trail.
Exactly.
It's quite remarkable.
And think about what that means. I mean, Christina McCreary knew that by sheltering Bruce, she's made an enemy of the most powerful army in medieval Europe at that time. And she didn't blink. I think that's just such a testament to her character.
That's Scots courage.
Absolutely. And it was a descendant of hers, Amy McCreary, who then actually built the castle up into much of what we see today. So we have sort of a staunch defender and then a staunch builder after it. But I did mention villains as well, and there's almost a Ramsay Bolton level type villain from Castle Tioram. And where to start with him? This was in the early 1600s. His name was Alan of Gomorron, and he was apparently quite a violent youth. And he had a gun, which he named, and he called it the Cuckoo, because it would crow every time he fired it off. We all know someone like this, right? They're the worst. And he became very, very infamous for just stalking the walls of Castle Tioram and shooting the cuckoo at anyone who got close. There were a few infamous cases where, for instance, a dear kinsman of his came to visit him, and he just saw someone approaching his castle, fired, killed the man, realised that this was one of his kin, and probably didn't bat much of an eye at that.
Throw him in the loch.
Yeah, probably. There was a serving woman who he suspected of stealing from him, so he just executed her, probably with his own hand. This is the kind of guy we're dealing with.
Cruel tyrant.
Yes, but this is where we get something approaching almost a morality tale here, because After a little while, Alan was not alone in his depredations. He could not go anywhere without being stalked by what became known as the Great Frog. So, yes, we're going into mythology a little bit here, good. But what's the Highlands without some mythology, right? Absolutely. And the Great Frog apparently followed Alan wherever he went. He even sailed out to Loch Boisdale, South Uist. Oh, wow. And when he got there, the frog was waiting for him on the shore. And he was sailing around sort of the harbour around Castle Tioram.
Is this like his conscience then, or something like that?
Pretty much, yeah.
I mean, Gemini cricket for him.
Well, and here you get this, this fantastic combination of sort of, the sort of manifestation of morality in a being, which is partly to do with sort of Christianity, but also partly to do with the sort of animist traditions in the Highlands as well being combined. And one story has him sailing around Castle Tioram, and there was a wicked storm blowing, and his crew was begging him to take this frog on board, and he was like, no, not letting that thing anywhere near me. Can't fault him, right? But then he finally relented, brought it on board, and the storm gave way. But it is said that this finally caught up with him. He died in his bed like all the worst ones do, it seems. No justice, right? But there was a wicked storm brewing that night, and it's said that Castle Tioram was beset by sort of a great whistling sound on all sides, almost like if you've heard the tales of the Wendigo in Canada, kind of like that, this otherworldly screeching. And eventually it was interrupted by what sounded like the crowing of a cuckoo, which is a nice little poetic justice for his old gun, right? And it said that the black frog stayed with him right to the bitter end until he passed away. So not a particularly dramatic end for him, but a little bit of justice there as well.
Sometimes those who live longest don't necessarily live best.
Exactly, yeah.
But bringing us on, as we kind of move towards the current state of the castle, one of the big issues that we've got with this place with its fantastic history and folklore and everything around it, it's abandoned, it's derelict, and we don't quite know what to do with it because it's stuck between two different people who want to do perhaps different things to it.
Yeah. And this is tying into a larger debate. I mean, it is very much a ruinous castle, and should say as well that if you do visit Castle Tioram, which I absolutely want you to do, wouldn't be making this video otherwise, I would strongly encourage you to resist the temptation to go inside. There are conservation concerns, and as well, it is dangerous. There is the potential for falling masonry. There's sort of, construction work scattered about. There are a few hard hats inside, just so that anyone who does go in can be relatively safe. But it's not something I recommend doing, which is tough, I know, going all the way there and then not going inside. But it is stunning from the outside.
It is stunning from the outside. That's probably the main focus, I think, if it's not officially a tourist attraction, it's not staffed, it's not manned, therefore we have to leave it. But that seems quite a tragedy in itself, isn't it? That this isn't a cared for attraction that could just rot away and crumble. And I've looked at a lot of abandoned buildings over the recent years, some much more modern than this, that are just sitting there, nothing's happening to them. It is a bit tragic, but no one knows what to necessarily do with it and how to get the money to keep it standing.
Yeah, because the two positions are sort of the conservationist perspective, which says, leave it as is, try to prevent any further damage, but don't proactively do anything with it, really. And then the other perspective, which is voiced by the owner, where he wants to turn it into a private residence, basically. And he said that he would put a museum to the Clan Donald on the ground floor, so giving some level of public access. But that's kind of the debate. Do we turn these places, which were always homes, let's face it, into a home now with significant renovation? Or do we sort of, acquiesce to the more capital R romantic position of leaving them lying? I'm torn on that. I think one potential way to go with that is, to use a few of these locations, of any given type, as good publicly accessible restorations, to show what it would have been like in its glory days, but then to maybe leave others in that more ruinous state so you get both sides of the story. But this is a debate that's been going on about Castle Tioram from over 20 years now, so we're certainly not going to solve it in a 15-minute video.
No, we're not. But hopefully we've done enough to convince you that it's worth checking out yourself. Despite the long journey, you will absolutely love this castle. It will stay long in the memory.
Absolutely. And for our next video, we're going to be going even further north. And that's going to be heading up to Ardvik Castle Castle, which is on the now immensely popular North Coast 500. Even more of a fragmentary ruin than Castle Tioram, so hopefully we'll catch you up on that one.
See you next time.